Another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and as always, I am joined by my good buddy from the Midwest, rocking the mullet. Maybe not lately, but in his recent past, John Utah Mulligan. What's going on, my man?
What's up? Coming to you from Iowa. Former mullet. Now it's just long and shaggy.
Now it's long and shaggy. The parking lot pirate these days.
Man, I tell you what, it's I changed cell phones. I had U.S. Cellular, and U.S. Cellular is kind of the big cell phone around these parts. But whenever you leave Iowa, then you don't have a cell phone. So I went back to Verizon. And it works pretty good at the house, but it works great anytime I leave the house. So that was a decision. But once I did it, then we ported all the numbers over. And I guess U.S. Cellular was like, oh, I guess they're done. So they shut off my home phone too. So
nice.
We had to call them back and try to get that reinstated. So, but I think now I'm actually going to just switch even the home phone over to Verizon. So anyways, I don't have a home phone right now, just cell phones.
Right, nice. Yeah, the parking lot pirate. It could be misconstrued as the ladies who are parking lot pirates at the truck stops. So you're not doing that,
yes.
Just so people are clear.
I'm not a lot lizard,
no.
I assure you.
Nice. So before we jump into things, let's take a quick second to thank our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. We are brought to you by Wicked Tree Gear, the longest lasting, fastest cutting, toughest tree trimming equipment you have ever used. You may not be as tough as the parking lot pirate Johnny Utah Law, but you sure can get a tough handsaw. And right now, if you visit wickedtreegear.com and you use the promo code TRUTH at checkout, you can get a 20% discount on your Wicked purchase along with free shipping. We are also brought to you by Exodus Outdoor Gear. Life's a passion. Pursue it. They've got the new Trek camera out that should be on their site now for purchase. They, of course, have the Lift 2 camera, which is badass and has been out for a while. So do yourself a favor. Go ahead and get stocked up this late winter, early spring to get ready for, so you're all prepared for Velvet Fest. You can visit them at ExodusOutdoorGear.com and pre-order or just order either of their cameras, and you can use the promo code TRUTH at checkout and save yourself $20. And of course, this time of year is a great time to do some frost seeding, and if you're doing that, you should head over to Tecumani.com and check out their seed selection. They are well known in the South, specifically Texas, but if you can grow stuff in sand, you can grow stuff anywhere. So no matter if you're in the South, Midwest, or Northeast, you'll want to check them out at Tecumani.com and use their product selector tool to have them help you pick the right seed for your food plots. You can use the promo code TRUTH at checkout there as well and save yourself 20%. And then, John, I know you were doing some shed hunting today. I'm imagining you probably had a Glacier cooler with you with some cold pops in them. And whether you're hunting, camping, or fishing, you'll enjoy smarter design, stronger construction, and superior insulation of Glacier coolers. Visit them at glaciercoolers.com, and like the rest, use the promo code TRUTH and save yourself 20% cash on a purchase. So, man, you're with Sugar Shane out doing a little shed hunting today, yes?
Yeah, he's sitting beside me right now. He came down from Wisconsin, and it's the first day that I can actually say was a dedicated shed hunting day to get out and look for some bone. So it was nice to get out. I think we did like 7.5 miles through the mud and the muck. It was a ton of fun.
Nice. Any good finds?
Yeah. Let's see. We found a one match set of a nice 5x5. Nice. I don't know, 3-year-old maybe, probably 3-year-old. And definitely a buck that I would love to bump into again, maybe this fall or next fall. But we found a tiny little 4-point side off of a 1-year-old. But I mean, we're talking like the most overly developed 1-year-old ever. And then nice. Found another 4-point side as well, and this one was extremely fresh, still had the wax ring. Nice. But man, the squirrels had gotten a hold of this joker like already.
Really?
A lot. So yeah, so nonetheless, we picked up 4 sheds today. It's still a little early out here. I mean, I'd say probably 50% of our bucks are still holding their headgear.
Nice.
But a day walking around looking for deer sign, looking at trails, and if you get to bend over and pick up one shed, that's a win.
Yeah, man, for sure. I'm looking forward to hopefully getting out. I'm not going to do any getting out this weekend. I'm in. I guess since hunting season's over, man, I've been in full swing like honey-do list mode. So this weekend, I won't be shed hunting. I will be installing lights and new outlets. So get excited for that. And then I have the super exciting thing to do next week. While I'll be traveling for some work, and then I'll be heading to Nashville, Tennessee on Friday next week for a wedding. So, which I don't know. You want to take my place, man? You take my place, go to the wedding, get sauced up, make a scene maybe, and I'll do some shed hunting in your stead.
Man, I tell you, the best part about that is Nashville, but consider this. It could be a wedding during November. So,
yeah,
you know,
I thought
it could be worse.
I thought of that. I was like, it is not during hunting season, so at least that's good. I tried to explain to my wife. I was like, look, they're going to get divorced. One in every, 50% of people end up in divorces. Like, I'll just catch them on the second one. It'll be cool. That'll be the one that lasts anyway. But that logic didn't go over so well. So as you can imagine,
I've thought about doing something on the gift registry, like enclose a note that says, if divorced within first year, gift gets returned back to the gifter,
right? Or please pay back in full, whatever the cost of the gift, just include the receipt. Right. Dude, that would be awesome. So what else has been going on, man? So what's going on with I know you had so Arrow Wild is on Carbon TV. I know that we announced that. I know you have the first, correct me if I'm wrong, the first episode is up and there's more episodes soon to come, right?
Yeah. So the first season we did just on Facebook, and what we did over the winter was compile those episodes, and basically episode 1 and 2 became episode 1, 3 and 4 became 2. So we doubled them up and went ahead and kicked those over to Carbon TV as season 1, and then just about 2 weeks ago, we launched our first exclusive episode. So it would be season 2, episode 1, went on to Carbon TV. And so far, man, it's been well received, and people seem to like it. I've been getting a lot of really cool messages. And if anybody's listening and they like it and they want to take the time to send a message, it never gets old, hearing from people saying, hey, I really like the way you guys did this, or but the common theme of the messages that we've been getting has been, hey, you guys are real dudes. You're hunting borrowed, private, door knock opportunity land or public land, and we really dig that. And you guys tell it like it is, and you can tell that you guys are, humble guys that you don't always have success,
Mm-hmm.
So that's been super cool.
Yeah, man. The cool thing is too, man, is like I've got, I was fortunate enough I got to meet a couple of your guys, Sugar Shane. I love that name, man. Sugar Shane. I just wish his last name was Mosley. That way we could, Sugar Shane Mosley just has like a ring to it. Could we rename his last name Mosley?
Yeah, really.
Sugar Shane. But
that's hilarious.
He and Tyler, and you're right, man. It's like just some down home dudes, man, guys that you want to have a drink with or have a beer with and just talk deer hunting. And it comes through in the video, which is awesome. And they're just good dudes in person too. So that always makes it kind of nice. I know you and I were talking a little bit the other night. I might make a little film, not going to kind of give out any details, but I'm excited to possibly try my hand at a very novice version of making a film. And I'm looking forward to picking your brain on how to make that happen. So.
Sure. And it's fun too, cause I love doing the web shows, and I love sharing the stories, but the bigger part of that is I like sharing the stories with my buddies.
Yeah.
And seeing their hunts. The team is extremely diversified between Iowa, Kentucky, and Wisconsin. Some guys have bigger pieces of ground, some have smaller pieces of ground. But we're all diehard bow hunters, so that's kind of that common theme. So that's what draws me into the web show and kind of keeps me wanting to do it. Mm-hmm. Me personally, my real passion is in, the photography side of things and my short films that I get to do.
Right.
The only bad side is, you get yourself in the mindset of what kind of footage you want to have for a web show. And then the footage and the storytelling of a short film is totally different. So you kind of got to wear two different hats. And I've had to struggle with that a little bit, where I kind of go back and forth, and it would probably be easier to just focus on one or the other. But man, I'm having fun doing both of them, so I don't want to give up either one,
Yeah, exactly. And I'll definitely be picking your brain, because I've already kind of started thinking of that as I kind of think about, the thing that I want to put together that you and I discussed the other night, and started kind of thinking about how I would map that out. And I think I just need to sit down and kind of like write it out, like what I think the flow should be. And then I probably needed to run it by you and say, tell me where I made a bunch of really poor decisions for the most part.
Yeah. Well, no, and that's just it. I mean, the one cool thing is, like, if you're the one telling the story and it's coming from you, then it's going to be legit and honest. And, as you know, but I can tell you, I've had many ideas that I've tried to do, and I'm like, yeah, that didn't work. Now, either I just wasn't good enough to make the story work, or the footage or the storyline wasn't good enough to follow along. But I think the good fallback on those short films is, as long as you're, I'll sound kind of cheesy here, as long as you're speaking from the heart, you can't go wrong, and people see that, and it'll convey to the audience.
Right. I think that was like a lyric from like an 80s soft rock ballad from like Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
True. As long as you're true to the heart.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You can't go wrong.
Speaking of heart, we were pulling on to one of the properties that we were going to shed hunt today, and Heart came on the radio. Dude. And it kind of got Shane and I a little pumped up for the walk. I'm not going to lie.
Dude, Heart is badass. I don't know how many people out there appreciate how hard Heart rocks. Like, those are some...
Heart was...
Those are some rocking
rockers,
chicks,
man.
dude. Yeah, I mean, they throw down. And then recently, in recent history, they've done a bunch of shows with like Alice in Chains and stuff. And that's actually a little known fact. I don't know how many people out there listening are Alice in Chains fans. But Jerry Cantrell from Alice in Chains was hugely influenced by Heart and has a lot of respect for Heart, which is why you see them share stages often together later in their career. Not sure if you knew that.
Very, very cool. Yeah. No, I did not know that. That is a fun fact.
Yeah, so those of you out there...
Leave it to the washed-up musician to come up with all the fun facts on music.
Yeah, exactly. When you try to say I'm a washed-up musician, it's like this guy knows...
Washed-up musician.
Oh, I know, dude. It's like I have so much
of my buddies,
useless music knowledge in my head. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, a buddy of mine, Dan, he used to always say I was an old washed-up race car driver. So
nice.
Anybody that used to do something a lot in their life and they don't do it anymore, I'm like, oh, yeah, they're just washed up.
Yeah, it's just like, get off my lawn, kid, and turn your music down. That's it. That's where I'm at these days. But hey, we got a cool show coming up, man, and I don't want to hold things up here getting to Lindsay. So, those out there listening, we're giving some love to our Southern brotherhood here today. We've, John and I, of course, where we live in the Midwest and, in Pennsylvania, which I don't know what we call that, Mid-Atlantic. It's kind of Northeast. It's got a little Midwest to it. So I'm not sure how we classify that, but we of course don't live in the South and hunt in the South predominantly now. John is from Kentucky, so there is some southernness, if you will, that maybe comes along with that. But we've not really dedicated much time in this show to talking about hunting the South specifically. So we thought it was high time that we bring someone on who is a true blue Southern boy and can talk to us a little bit about how hunting the South might be a little bit different from hunting the Midwest. And he works with QDMA, and he's got a lot of great insight just into where hunting's kind of headed, and we kind of cover a lot of different topics. I don't want to give too much away, but we're talking with Lindsay Thomas from QDMA. Super good dude. Very knowledgeable about the hunting industry in general and just the hunting and where it's headed. And he always brings great perspective, and I think a level of like measured conversation whenever he's discussing some topics that could be touchy. And always kind of gives a good perspective on it. So we're looking forward to talk to him. Unfortunately, John being the parking lot lizard that he is these days, we did have a technical issue. So partway through, you'll notice that John wasn't any longer with us. We had some cell phone problems. But otherwise, the conversation with Lindsay was good, and looking forward to jumping on with him. Anything else to add, John?
No. And that's the thing. Like, Lindsay's a cool dude, very, very well spoken, smart, super smart guy. And it is, I think anytime we get a chance to, you talk to somebody from the South and discuss their style of hunting and stuff like that, because it's, as we know, it's very different. And I think even the way people will approach hunting is a little different at the same time. So it's always cool to talk to anybody from different parts. There's always something to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get Lindsay on. All right, folks, welcome back, and we are live, and you're listening to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today, fortunately for all of you out there listening, it is not just John and I, so you're getting a reprieve from that crazy talk. Today, John and I are joined by a buddy of ours from Quality Deer Management Association, Lindsay Thomas. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Clint. How about you guys?
I'm doing good, man. I was looking forward to having you on. Looking forward to getting a little education on some southern hunting and give some love to our southern brothers on some hunting tips and deer talk.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for having me. It was great meeting you guys at the ATA show, and I've really been looking forward to this.
Yeah, I know we've connected over email and a bunch of different times and stuff. And it was great to get to run into you. Of course, Ryan and the crew. We've had Ryan on the show in the past, and he'll be coming on again here soon. So we're looking forward to that. But really looking forward to diving into some southern hunting topics, man. I know we were talking a little bit on the upfront. It's one of those things where, John lives in Iowa, I live in Pennsylvania, and so of course a lot of our conversation kind of revolves around those geographic locations. Truth be told, I was actually born in the South, so I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, but my family's from Pennsylvania, so. I got maybe just a little tinge of South in me, maybe just a little bit. It's I like the bourbon, I like the culture. It's definitely this time of year, I like the warm weather. So if I could easily be adopted if you're looking to adopt.
Well, we'll welcome you back anytime. You're born here. We'll let you in.
Nice, I like it. So first, before we get started, man, why don't we just do a little bit of background on you? How you got started in hunting and what you do for a living right now.
Okay. Got started hunting like a lot of us did, which is someone, a family member who could take us did so. And for me, it was my dad. He was mentored or raised hunting by his uncle. And so he raised me and my brother and my sister as well, hunting, all three of us. And just started from a very young age going with dad to the woods and been doing it, hunting and fishing my whole life. I am fortunate enough as a hunter to work for the Quality Deer Management Association, QDMA. I am their director of communications and been in that role for almost 15 years now. And what I do in that job is I am editor of QDMA's magazine, Quality Whitetails, and also oversee the website, QDMA.com, and our social media and our email communications. So it's a pretty big bowl of stuff that I handle, and have Brian Grossman is our communications manager, works with me in that, and Cindy Compton is our design manager, and pretty much the three of us manage a good bit of what QDMA does on the communications side. So I'm journalism is my background. I studied journalism in college and always kind of knew I wanted to be an outdoor writer. And just got very fortunate to be with QDMA because as a deer hunter, I love, like a lot of us, I do a lot of it. I fish, I hunt turkeys. I'm a fanatical turkey hunter in the spring. But for me, kind of the chief passion is deer hunting, but also deer management, messing with the population and making it better, playing with the habitat, really getting, just elbow deep in the process of building better deer hunting through better deer populations. And so for me to be at QDMA is really, just ideal for me, and I love it. Yeah,
it's I don't think you could find a better suited position for you, man, because you're ate up with it, as John and I like to say. It's it's in your blood, and it runs deep. I have a question though. So were you born and raised in the South? I mean, I can kind of understand that from the accent a little bit that the answer is probably yes. But where specifically? Because I know you're in Georgia now, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Right.
Always been in Georgia. I was born in Savannah, Georgia, on the coast, not too far from Charleston, where you were born.
Oh, nice.
and grew up in Wayne County, Georgia, which is in southeast Georgia, about one county in from the ocean. Grew up on my family farm there. My dad was a farmer when I was growing up, and now live in North Georgia, right outside Athens, Georgia, in the home of the University of Georgia, which is where the QDMA national headquarters is. So my dad still has the family farm in South Georgia, and that's where he lives, and that's where I travel to do a good bit of my hunting. That's the unfortunate part, is it's 4 hours south of where I live.
Yeah.
To get back to that land, but I hunt all over the state. So I live in North Georgia, hunt in South Georgia, but been fortunate in some of the various jobs I've had over time that it's always been here in Georgia.
Nice.
I love other parts of the country, love the West, travel a good bit, but I guess I'm not complaining that I'm still here in Georgia. It's home.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you could find a lot worse places to live than Georgia. Georgia's a really cool state. I've got to spend a little bit of time in Georgia. And it's one of those places where that you could definitely find you can see yourself living there. It wouldn't take much for the imagination to kind of plop yourself there permanently. So the nice weather, good people, great culture, and this, I'm going to kind of do a little lead in or foreshadowing here that has a really good music scene as well. And I think that you left out one of the most important parts of your biography, because I know that you are a little bit of a guitar picker too, aren't you?
I am, and you are too, right?
Yeah, that's right, man. So so when did you start playing?
Oh, I guess I would say just before I started high school. My dad played. He actually sort of taught himself when I was even younger than that. And then, when you got guitars sitting around the house and, hearing country music and Southern rock and country rock all the time, you just eventually start messing with it, and I did. And my brother plays as well. My brother Rands, who is a wildlife biologist, he actually is more talented than I am. He actually makes a little money at it, playing here around town and some gigs. I mostly just entertain myself, and I like to say that I play brewgrass, which means the more beer you drink, the better I sound. So.
There you go.
But I enjoy it. And in fact, just got back from a meeting in Nashville, Tennessee, the Southeast Deer Study Group meeting, and they gave out as some swag for attendees guitar picks that said Nashville, Tennessee on it. So I came home with one of those.
Nice. That's a good deal, man. Yeah, I hear you. It's definitely. I like talking to folks who are deer hunters, but that are also share that same common bond of being a guitar picker, for sure. It's one of those things where it's interesting. And I want to ask you this next question, because I find there to be a lot of parallels, at least there were for me. And then this will kind of start to help us lead into, I guess, our more specific deer conversations. But I'm just curious if you find any parallels that exist between playing music, writing, and chasing whitetails. Is there any? Because we had Jimmy Herman on, and I don't know if you know Jimmy at all, but he's big time guitar player, fiddle player for the Carrie Underwood band, and we had a good conversation about deer hunting with him, because he's as fanatical about deer hunting as he is his guitar playing, and we had a good chat just about if he felt there were any parallels between them, and he really didn't, but I feel kind of the opposite. So I'm just curious what your take is.
Yeah, I guess I'm equally bad at all three. Is that one way I could sum it up?
That's great.
No, but that's a great question, and you're right. Certainly one of the appeals to music and playing guitar and playing songs, and the songs that I play, other people's songs, I've never written a song, is, I love songs that tell stories or that use language in very creative or satisfying ways, just like reading good writing and doing good writing. So it's sort of a good tie-in. And then also, in terms of hunting, there's the sort of meditative or relaxation qualities of that, being out in hunting and being immersed in nature, and writing is a way to sort of capture that, just like music and playing music for me personally is, a way to chill and relax and enjoy language. And so, yeah, there's definitely a crossover there and a tie-in, if there was a Venn diagram of these,
right,
there's definitely a synergy there.
Right. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned story, right? Because I think, that's one thing when we look, and I'll kind of turn it over to John in a second, because I'm pretty sure he probably has a point of view on this, just because when you think about hunting now, and you think about social media and you think about some of the media opportunities that are out there, this format, the podcast format or video format or whatever the case might be, especially when you get into video and like hunting shows and stuff like that, it feels like sometimes, on some of the, what I'll call like the grander scale or the more grandiose produced, hunting shows, possibly not all of them. I don't want to generalize here and paint with a broad brush, but I think they're sometimes most often kind of provided as an example only because they're most readily accessible. But sometimes that full story gets away from you and it becomes about an end result where a lot of times that's not always what the hunt was about necessarily. I think that I've personally had great hunts that I came home empty-handed and there was no arrow that was released, but it didn't diminish the story that I had with the hunt. John, what do you think, man? Because I know you're a video guy and you have your web show that's awesome, and I know that your kind of focus is more on like the storytelling, and that you kind of that's kind of where you kind of how you paint your picture. So I'm just curious your perspective.
Well, growing up in Kentucky, learned how to play basketball, but definitely did not learn how to play guitar. So if I'm going to tell a story, it's going to have to be through the hunts. But no, I mean, you brought up an interesting point with social media and the easy consumption for everybody to share your hunts and to see everybody else's hunts. I think the days of the grip and grins is kind of done, and I think there is a big movement where people are seeking, more of the story. And, it's just like, we were talking about just a second ago, as far as a good song, a good reading, spoken words in a creative way. I think that has, gotten into the film side. And maybe it's something that also came from the major motion pictures. I mean, we're a long ways away from the black and white, picture shows of old. So hunting has, the hunting stories have evolved with it as well. And I think it's another way for people to express, why it is they hunt and what did that hunt mean to them. I think it's a great movement. I can't get enough of it. There's so many talented storytellers out there. Some of the best are Jason Matzinger. I mean, that guy is just a born hunting storyteller. Donnie Vincent does a phenomenal job as well. Yeah. And there's many, many others,
Yep. Yeah. So I think, John, you hit the nail on the head where it's like people were wanting to consume that story, and whether they're getting it in the written word now, or whether it's, the format that it's taken in video that's kind of changing shape. I think when you have good storytellers that are telling the right story, I think it does nothing but help hunters and hunting in general. And I think as long as we keep that as our focus, we'll be in good shape. But we'll move away from the hippy dippy crunchy stuff here. We got some feels right there. We might want to just get our man card back and talk some deer hunting here real quick. But so let's take a minute here. I know you mentioned on the upfront, that you of course work for QDMA and in the capacity of the director of communications, and you're the editor of the Quality Whitetail magazine and so forth. But I wanted to kind of just take a second and talk a little bit about, at a high level, what QDMA kind of stands for, what their initiatives are. I know you guys had a really big meeting this last year, and I believe it was in New Orleans, your annual meeting. And you guys kind of, I don't want to say redefined, but kind of re-laid out your roadmap for the next 5 or so years. And I just want to kind of give an opportunity to kind of make sure that we kind of express what that is and what QDMA is doing and what's kind of on the horizon for them.
Yeah. Appreciate that opportunity. And you're right. Last year at our convention in New Orleans was kind of when we rolled out this shift, and it's not really changing who we are. I guess the story I would tell on that is that, where QDMA came from when we were founded 30 years ago this year in 1988. It was an answer to a stage in America's deer hunting history where some changes need to be made in the way we hunted and managed deer herds. For a long time, we were in the restoration mode, bringing deer back, and it was don't shoot a doe because that's the future of your population. Meanwhile, take the first deer that comes along that's legal. because there are not many of them, and you may not, the idea of passing a legal buck, an antlered buck, was crazy because you may not see another one that season. Mm-hmm. And so that meant pressure was high on yearling bucks and almost nil on does. We passed a point fairly quickly where that was a useful paradigm. And as the years went by, we started reaching a crisis level really in a lot of areas where deer populations were way too high for the habitat to support them in a healthy condition. But these populations were skewed toward does. Very few bucks were in the population, and the bucks that were out there were all young because most of them were getting shot at a year and a half, and very few were making it into adult ages. Well, QDMA was founded on the biological side to take science and take sound deer biology and package it for hunters to understand how to make the right choices locally, whether, when is doe harvest needed and when is it not, and if so, how many, and the benefits of letting some bucks reach adult age classes. How does your hunting change locally when you've got a few adult bucks out there? And of course, it's more fun, it's more exciting. You see the behaviors that you don't get to see when you don't have adult bucks in the population. All the things that make November have such an appeal to all of us. Scrapes and rubs and chasing and fighting and all of that. And of course, seeing more adult bucks and even side benefits like finding more sheds and things like that. So, that was really the big push for the longest time for QDMA was encouraging hunters to look at a different way of managing deer. Rather than just being a consumer out there to take the first legal deer, be a manager and make decisions locally that can improve your own hunting. Well, we kind of reached a point where we feel like we had done about the best we could do on that front. Surveys lately show that, the majority, more than 80% in some surveys of American deer hunters pretty much already do QDM. They are taking does, they are protecting young bucks to some extent. And the harvest statistics that we see coming out of most of the states show, over years, decades, a huge shift in age structure of buck harvest. Many, many more adult bucks, mature bucks being taken today by American hunters, and a lot fewer yearling bucks. Herds are more balanced. They are maybe too low in many areas, and we had some years here lately with some combinations of things like EHD outbreaks and some rough winters and some other things that maybe took us and did in fact take deer populations too low in some areas. We're bouncing back from a lot of that, and so the bottom line was we kind of felt like from a management standpoint, are there deer hunters out there that we could continue to educate on the benefits of QDM? Yeah, there are, and that mission, that part of what we do will never change. But at the same time, we looked around and we kind of realized that on the horizon, meantime, some pretty serious threats had come up to deer and deer hunting and our hunting traditions. And of course, y'all can name them as quick as I can. Mm-hmm. Not just loss of hunters, loss of access, loss of habitat, but threats as well to the deer resource. Outbreaks of EHD in places where that virus had never been seen before. And then, of course, chronic wasting disease, which is a different disease, CWD, has become and is growing in seriousness and has become a real true threat to long-term to deer and deer hunting. So things like that. The changing demographics of America and how that affects the future of hunters and hunter recruitment. All of these things, we kind of said, we really need to turn, if we're going to have deer hunting for the future, someone needs to be addressing these things. And that's what we've done. We have come up with what we're working under right now is a set of 5-year goals that we announced last year. And we challenged ourselves in a number of areas and laid out a big list of 5-year goals. You can go on our website and see them. Anybody can read all about them, and of course in the magazine. But it is things like raising certain amounts of money over the next 5 years. Where I think we're going for $1 million over the course of 5 years to go to deer research to help on questions like how do we answer CWD. We are trying to expand QDM cooperatives, which are landowners or hunters on leases and other lands and even public lands, reaching across property lines and working across broader areas to improve habitat and improve deer hunting. Those are really can play a strong role in the future of deer hunting in a lot of ways, and even to address some of these other problems we're having. So we want to promote cooperatives. We want to, when it comes to the access question, our first priority with that is, rather than just going out there and creating more public land for deer hunting to improve access, our feeling is there's a lot of public land out there that is underutilized because it's poorly managed. Mm-hmm. So rather than just buy more acres, we want to see states and the federal government better manage the public land we have, because you can increase access just as well that way. If you take an acre, you're not managing and improve it, you can produce more recreation on that now with land you already own. So we want to see the habitat better managed on public land to improve access. We want to grow mentors and mentoring programs and hunter recruitment. We want to increase venison sharing is one of our big goals. And again, the specifics are laid out. And Clint, you and I have discussed this because, as a side note, you've got your first article in Quality Whitetails coming up in a new issue. Yeah. And we're proud to have it. It's a good one because it fits real well with our goals. It is about your experiences sharing venison with a neighbor who doesn't hunt and the outcome of that. And this is what we're seeing, is that venison is really a great, as you talked about venison diplomacy, or venison outreach, however you want to put it, but sharing venison with people who don't hunt and exposing them to the idea of this, providing your own food, the sustainability of it, sort of the local eating and locavore movement, all of those sort of aspects. Sharing venison can really open a non-hunter's eyes to what hunting is really about, who we are, and solve a lot of the misperceptions there, and help us not only, even if it doesn't, giving venison to someone doesn't turn them into a hunter, at least it can open the door to sustain that support that we enjoy today into the future from non-hunters supporting what we do. So venison donation is a big one. But there's a long list, and I'd encourage your listeners to go to QDMA.com and check out these goals. And it's all of these things are intended to address these concerns that I listed that we see the biggest challenges to deer and deer hunting in the future, both near and in the long term. And they're pretty ambitious goals, I got to tell you. And we've kind of laid out a big job for ourselves and our members and our volunteers, and we're going to be calling on all of them to contribute. It's going to rely a lot on not just our members, staying members or joining or giving us money to go do these things, but actually participating, donating the venison, mentoring other adult hunters, mentoring young hunters, helping improve habitat on public lands, donating so money can go to research. All of these things, we're calling on that help.
Yeah, the good thing is, or the cool thing is that I know I've mentioned to you, and John and I've talked about this too, is like we're getting ready to have Ryan on as well, and we're going to be covering a lot of these things in more detail, talking about the heritage and tradition and where things are kind of trending, and because if I don't want to give away the I guess the punchline, if you will, or all the goods, but if you take a look at the data and the information that's out there that has been acquired through you guys, or whether it's the Game and Fish or whomever, there's some eye-popping information in there that if you're a hunter, regardless if you're a deer hunter or not, should scare you, or should at least make you take pause, if nothing else. Not just at the numbers per se that you see today, but how they map out in terms of their trajectory over the next 5 to 10 years. That's when it starts to get really kind of a little frightening. And I think once people, understand that, if they don't currently see the value in getting involved and making sure to, retain what we have, if not grow it, then I think that those things will certainly make an impact. So with that, you brought something up there that I wanted to kind of touch on, because I want to turn this back to the southern hunting topic here. So you'd mentioned, the different outbreaks of some diseases and stuff like that have occurred, whether it was EHD, CWD, whatever the case might be. How is that? I know we talk about it, at least I know of it from a Midwestern perspective and a Northeastern perspective, because I know there's been some states in the Midwest that have been, impacted, with CWD specifically. And then I know that there's Pennsylvania, my hometown, where both my family properties are in the hot zone, if you will. And so how is this impacting the South in general? I mean, are you guys, is it something that people are super concerned about? Are there a lot of states that have a lot of, hot zones or hot areas, if you will? And so what's the status there?
Yeah, the Southeast is really kind of still the holdout, although unfortunately, just 2 weeks ago, we got the news that Mississippi discovered its first case positive deer in Issaquena County, which is on the Mississippi River near the Louisiana border. And so that was very unfortunate news. Largely, at least looking at it from my perspective in Georgia, the next closest positive we had was up in West Virginia. So the Deep South and Southeast really has remained fairly clean to this point. But, now it's in Mississippi. We keep seeing it pop up and jump. And, I hate to be a pessimist. I really hope that we find an answer to this problem, a vaccine or something. There's no hope. There's nothing on the horizon right now for that, but a lot of people are working on it. Mm-hmm. But the way it seems to continue spreading, I'm afraid that, I'm not going to make any predictions. I'd like to try to remain optimistic, but still most of the Southeast is without CWD. At least it hasn't been discovered yet. And I hope we can keep it that way.
Right. Yeah, I hear that. So with that, it sounds like, especially your family farm and stuff like that, it sounds like you guys are pretty much in the clear. So, I don't think if I'm reading the tea leaves here, it doesn't sound like it impacted your most recent deer season. And with that, how did things go this year? Did you find success? Was it a rough one? What was the prognosis for that?
I had a good season, not in terms of deer harvest, but just chances to get out and go with friends and just have some really enjoyable hunts. Hunting with my dad a good bit at our family farm, and just had a good time with him. We saw some bucks. We kind of have at the farm there. It's a little bit just like anybody. There's a cycle where some years you've got a handful of older bucks you're looking at on camera, or two, one or two that you really got your eye on. And this year was maybe a little bit of a down year for us, where we didn't have a whole lot of bucks on camera that were older than about 3.5. So we still got out there and hunted during the rut and had a good time. Saw some of the bucks that I saw, at least one that I would have taken if I'd gotten a shot at him, but just didn't have a chance. So we had a good season, and I got some venison for the freezer. Nice. With a late season doe harvest, and had a good time. I do some hunts each year, and have for a number of years with friends of mine. I do 2 hunts. I do a hunt each year with friends of mine who all have boys around the same age, and another hunt with all friends of mine who all have girls around the same age. So nice. We do a father-son and a father-daughter hunt each year. That's awesome. And I always look forward to those every year. And so we had another good time with those hunts this year as well.
Nice. Yeah, I got a little girl who I got her shooting a bow, I guess, when she was probably about 7, I think, and she's a pretty good shot. I'm holding out some hope this year that she's strong enough to pull back enough weight that I might be able to get her in a tree stand for an early season hunt this year. We'll see how that pans out, but she seems like she still wants to go. She likes to turkey hunt with me. She might end up being more of a turkey hunter than she is a deer hunter, which is good for her, bad for me, because I tell John all the time I'm the world's worst turkey hunter that you've probably ever met. They seem to elude me. John, on the other hand, man, you usually tend to get into the birds, don't you?
Yes, I love turkey hunting. I think I've harvested 4 or 5 Boone and Crockett's the last couple of years. That's the beauty of turkeys; they're all Booners. You know what I mean? That's
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, and then there was that funny commercial that was on that somebody did on Facebook last year, or it might have even been a little bit longer, but it was the 2 guys sitting in the blind, and they're like, "Oh, look, there's one coming in. He's just a 3-year-old. We need to let him go another year." That was so funny, And they're like, "Wait, no. I think one of his spurs is broke off. Yeah, hard pass. That was the funniest thing in the world, because that's the beauty of turkey hunting. We all get to be superstars, and we all kill Boone and Crockett, Toms during that season. So that's a cool thing. I wanted to. I hate to go backwards on our conversation, but you guys were talking, and I didn't want to cut anybody off. We were talking about some of the things that have affected deer hunting. And I want to get Lindsay's take on, we talk about geographical locations and different demographics and age, but there's also a little bit different style of hunting. And I think a little bit different style mentality when it comes to deer hunting. Like I said, I grew up and cut my teeth hunting in Kentucky, and in my area, the way I grew up initially, it was still very much, if it's brown, it's down. If it flies, it dies. And then, you get into Iowa, and as some people look at Iowa and they say, okay, that's like trophy bucks. And I've even noticed it with a younger generation around Southeast Iowa, that a lot of these kids, they kind of grew up with that. So a lot of these kids are like, yeah, I saw a good 4-year-old, but I let him go. I wasn't passing 4-year-olds when I was in Kentucky. I promise you, Mm-hmm. So that being said, I look at things like we'll call them social media bullies. Is somebody afraid to post a picture of a deer that they killed because it's not big enough or it wasn't old enough? So does that deter people from hunting in general and getting into the sport? We talked about the lack of properties, and I'm guilty of this myself. I try to lease up as much ground as I possibly can, but like I said, I'm guilty. That I hate that I do that, but that's what I want. I want big chunks of ground to manage and really try to focus on QDM and get some really nice, mature, big bucks running around. But if everybody does that, a guy that lives in a subdivision may not have access to any ground unless it's public. And one thing I can say here in Southeast Iowa, we have huge tracts of public land. The problem is you look at old Google Earth images and you see these really nice sections of set aside that now are just grown up cedars, and they've lost the funding, and they're not doing food plots anymore, and they're not maintaining that set aside. One of the things that I've been able to do here in Southeast Iowa is I became a hunter safety instructor. And one of the coolest things, I love seeing the kids in the class. That's cool because, as we talked about, that's kind of the future of hunting and the next generation. But I tell you what I like seeing the most is there was an adult that was in the class. So, and Lindsay, you mentioned this too, as far as introducing new hunters. It's not just introducing kid hunters. It's introducing maybe a full-grown adult that's 35, 40 years old. One of the benefits that I have seen with that is if you teach, you've got a young kid that's 8, 9, 10 years old in the class, that's great. And you plant those ethics early and hope that they maintain that throughout their hunting career. But with an older generation, they're going to work and they're talking to people that may be non-hunters. So I think they can be as much of a positive, if not greater positive influence to the rest of the communities and the rest of the people that maybe look at hunting in a negative way. I just wanted to throw those pieces in there. Like I said, I apologize for going backwards.
No, let's go backwards. I think those are good things. What are your initial thoughts, Lindsay?
Yeah, the adult thing is something that is, and I threw that in there because it's something we've realized and other people are realizing too, and that is that we spend a lot of groups have spent a lot of time taking kids hunting, and that certainly is important. We realize many of us got into this, not all of us, but many of us got into this because a parent took us, or an uncle, or a grandparent, or something like that. And so we're trying to replicate that. For kids that don't have anyone who hunts in their family who can take them. Well, let's take them. But what we're starting to realize is not that that's ineffectual or, has not been worthwhile. It has been. But what we're starting to realize is rather than take the kid hunting, if you take a young person hunting, but they still don't have someone in their family who's an adult who can continue to foster that interest, that is has a good chance of fizzling. But if you take the adult in the family and you teach them and you mentor them and you get them into hunting, and teach them how to do it, then they can mentor their kids. So it's sort of the let's do this in the right direction approach. And I think you're going to see not that we're going to continue with our youth outreach, but we're going to bolt on a lot of new programs which we've already begun reaching out to adults and like I said, bringing those adult onset hunters into the club.
Yeah, I think John, you touched on something else that was interesting, was just like the cultural difference, and this is kind of, I guess, a nice segue into starting to kind of really dig it into, the some of the differences and similarities between hunting the South or hunting in the Northeast or hunting in the Midwest. So I'm just curious, as John mentioned, a big thing, especially when you get to the Midwest, is you're looking for either, hunting private ground, maybe that your family owns or that you own yourself, or you're looking for, ground to lease, as John mentioned. And then of course the other option is public, so what's the most prevalent, I guess, opportunities for folks in the South who are hunting? It's like, is there a lot of private property owners still that's where how the majority of the folks are doing their deer hunting? Are they getting out on public land more often? Do they do more leasing? Like, I'm not that familiar with how the South operates in terms of like how they get their access. Before we continue our conversation, let's talk about Wicked Tree Gear. Hardcore deer hunters need tools that can keep up. We don't baby our gear and take on whatever Mother Nature dishes out. Check out Wicked Tree Gear handsaws and pole saws at wickedtreegear.com. Use promo code TRUTH to save yourself 20% on your next purchase with free ground shipping. And get a saw that's tough enough to work as hard as you hunt. And now back to the show.
Right. Well, just in the East, and really where most people hunt whitetails, it's all predominantly done on private land. Out west, it's the reverse of that. And then, you've been out west, and you know that all of the national land that's out there and national forests, and it's really extensive. And so that most hunting in the West takes place on public land. Well, anywhere in the East and anywhere whitetails are, pretty much it's the reverse. So in the South, just like where you are, it's, most of the hunting takes place on private land. But just like I think any other Eastern state, we have a lot of state-owned public land that we call WMAs, wildlife management areas, and I think a lot of states call them WMAs. And we have federal lands. We have, federal refuges, national wildlife refuges that many of which offer permit hunting or, quota hunting. We have national forest land in Georgia. It's a wide range of different types of public land. Army Corps of Engineers land around reservoirs that's open to hunting. So, yeah, there's a diversity and a large supply of public land here in Georgia and in most southeastern states, just like in the Midwest and Northeast, too, has, state and federal lands open to public hunting.
Right. So what about, I heard tell at one point that, hunting clubs were something that were kind of, I guess, that were more prevalent in the South than they are in the North or the Midwest. Is that something that's still true today? And what's the difference between, I guess, a hunting club and like folks who have like a deer camp in the North or in the Midwest?
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing. Okay.
Same thing. Hunting club is just a term in the South. That's just kind of, vocabulary is really the only difference, I think. And, when I first came to work for QDMA and started doing quality whitetails, before that, I had worked for a state-specific hunting and fishing magazine here in Georgia. And so now I had readers who were in Iowa and Michigan and Pennsylvania and places that where I didn't really know the hunting culture as well as I knew it here. And that was one of the first things I encountered, was that a lot of people would say, "What is a hunting club?" And I just threw that term around like I assumed everyone understood it.
Right.
So, yeah, I learned real quick that was a term that you had to be careful about, because some readers didn't know what that was. And it's simply that, like I say, it is simply the term that I grew up with hearing people say, and I say it myself, going to the hunting club this weekend. And it's merely, in most cases in the South or in Georgia, when you're talking about a hunting club, you are talking about a land that you've leased. And most often it is privately owned timber company land. And the timber companies lease the hunting rights out to individuals, and they set up a group of friends, family, whoever, strangers they can recruit through the forums online to join their club, and basically put together enough people to afford the lease rate and still have enjoyable hunting on this property. And I think that leasing is more goes back farther in the South than it does in other parts of the country. It's newer in the Midwest and the North as a concept, this idea of leasing hunting rights. And to me, even discovering that in many states that you could literally walk onto someone's private land and hunt without asking, unless they had posted it. That is a foreign concept to me when I first heard about that, because in the South, it's not that way at all. You can't go on someone else's land even without asking.
Right. That's
trespassing if they care to prosecute you for it. But much of the land in the South traditionally was owned by large timber companies. And so they, once you get outside the towns, if it wasn't a farm, it was timberland. It was probably owned by a timber company, and they were trying to make extra income by leasing out the hunting rights too. And so a lot of hunting by folks who didn't own their own land and weren't hunting public land was done on leased timberlands, and it just came to be in the South that we called that the hunting club. So yeah, it's not like a golf club,
right?
Where the elite go to hunt. It is, and
it's some good old boys.
It is. I've been in some clubs that been a member of clubs where the camp, it looks like a third world country. It is not anything high end, I can tell you. It's just
right.
Tents and shacks and whatever anybody can find to sleep in to spend the weekend deer hunting. So
right, yeah, no.
yeah. When you said it, it's up there. You have the hunt camp scene with everybody gathered around the campfire and eating venison and cleaning guns and getting gear together and getting ready to hunt at sunrise. It's the same thing here. Just a lot more people call them hunting clubs.
Right. So that land that was owned by you said timber company, right? Is who owned it?
Correct.
A lot of them, at least. Yeah. So is it the way it's been timbered? I mean, does it typically make for good deer habitat? Just the way that it has been cut? Because I'm imagining it's probably been select cut to a degree. Because whenever if they're cutting for boards, I'd imagine it has to be a certain size. If it's paper timber, it might be a little bit different story. But I'm just kind of curious what the habitat is like on some of those lease properties. Because I've seen some hunting in Ohio. One of the pieces of public ground I hunt it butts up to a piece of timber company land. And that timber company land holds so many deer because it's been timbered off in so many different sections, and it's just nasty thick that, you couldn't walk through it if you wanted to, but deer can get through it. So it's a great safe haven for them. So I'm just curious what that habitat looks like on those properties.
Yeah, it depends. Obviously a timber company is going to, they're trying to make money out of the timber resources there. And in the past, and it differed geographically. For example, here in coastal Georgia, we have a number of pulp and paper mills. And so demand just within the vicinity of those mills was higher for pulpwood than in locations that weren't near a mill. And so much of the land was managed for pulpwood, and that's young timber. In other words, they're planting pine trees, growing them to about 15 years of age, thereabouts, till they're just minimum sized for pulpwood, and cutting them and clear cutting them, running them to the mill, replanting that area, row to row pines. And that is, when it's young and has just been clear cut and the timber the newly planted seedlings are young, that's good habitat. It does quickly, the pines like that quickly lock out and shade the understory and become kind of a pine straw desert fairly, within a few years. So it's sort of a constant rotation. Pulpwood land gets turned over a lot faster. But here lately, in the last few years, you see a lot more timber companies managing for saw timber, and they are doing, thinning and select cuts. They may be planting plantation pine row to row on the high ground, but then they're coming in at a stage where some of it is marketable and cutting out rows, every fifth row, every third row, or whatever type of thinning they're doing, and leaving the remaining trees, because, the studies show when you thin them like that, the remaining trees grow faster. Right. So they're growing bigger trees for saw timber, for lumber. And then when you thin like that, you're putting the sunlight back on the ground, and those thin stands are very productive for understory forage and cover. So that's great for deer. And you see a lot more timber companies these days managing a mix of land and a lot more thin timber rather than clear cutting and growing pulpwood on a very short rotation. So I think the thinning and saw timber is much better practice for deer habitat. And yeah, that's, but in other areas, some of them are growing hardwoods and harvesting hardwoods in hardwood drainages or hardwood ridges in some of the uplands, and focusing more on that. But just overall, in the South, throughout the South, and you can see this if you look at aerials of the countryside, and I've done this, the South in general sees, the forest sees a lot more regular turnover than any other portion of the country, particularly the Northeast. The Northeast is heavily forested, but rarely harvested. You got a lot of mature impact forest with closed canopies and not much in the understory for deer. It looks pretty if you like a big, pretty oak tree, and I do. But if it just goes on forever and there's no very little young forest or understory, that's not good for a deer. So that's kind of the primary difference between the Southeast and the Northeast. And in the Midwest, as you know, forest is sort of in the minority. It's mostly open ground and farmland, and forests are more of the strips and creek drainages interconnecting or between all the fields, whereas it's in the Southeast, forests dominate.
Right. So I'm kind of interested. It's the South has. I'm going to plead, being naive here to hunting in the South at all. So I'm going to have to, I guess treat me like I am a first-time hunter in the South. Like I've never stepped foot in the timber. What is the biggest difference, I think, in your opinion, between hunting the South and hunting anywhere else? If you had to choose one thing and said, this is one thing that's just drastically different when you come to the South.
Yeah, it's kind of what I just described, and that is that cover is everywhere. We have unlike the Midwest and Northeast, our growing season is much longer. Plants grow faster, and spaces that are left vacant in the sun don't stay that way for long. Things grow, and seedlings and vines and shrubs take off and fill that space very quickly. And within the very short time, it's become a forest again. And so and all of that dominates. And so that's really the biggest difference that you will see when you come down here to hunt is sort of it's not just a natural picture of where you want to be to hunt the deer. I guess what I'm saying, and I've been in airplanes and flown over the Midwest, flying up north, and looked down and going, man, I'd love to hunt land like that, because it's got these, hold out your hand and spread your fingers apart.
Yeah.
And that's what the woods look like. And you go, boy, all you got to do is hunt in one of those fingers and you're going to be with the deer.
Right.
The South is different. You fly over the South and what do you see? Everything's green. There are certainly farm fields, but for the most part, green dominates. And a lot of particularly timber company land that people are leasing to hunt, and a lot of public land is managed this way because some of it is even timber company land that's leased for public hunting. It is, it's solid forest, and a lot of hunters even on leased land find it hard to find space to squeeze in a few food plots.
I was just going to say, yeah,
trying to grow a tree on every place they can. So that's it. It is. If I dropped you on the ground down here and said, "Where do you want to go hang your stand?" It's not as simple as looking at an aerial and going, well, here's where the deer are probably going to be.
Right.
You can't do that. You have to get out on the ground and go see all these acres, and then decide, well, over here we've got, acorns and white oaks and that kind of thing. So when those are falling, that'll be the place to be, scout and find fruit, scout and find, other travel patterns. And if you got a food plot, you start scouting and seeing where the deer are, how they're accessing that. Scouting is so much more important. You have to get out there and see the ground. You can't look at a map and rely on bottlenecks and funnels and things like that to just immediately show you where you want to be. Because we just don't have, very rarely do you have a funnel or a bottleneck created by the setup of the forest cover.
Right. So I guess, are there challenges also in the realm of, lack of, trying to figure out the right way to say this, lack of topography or elevation change? Because that's one thing, you can always kind of look at. It's like, to your point, if you have a lot of understory and it's green and you don't have all these little funnels that are kind of being created by, breakup of the forest, if you will. It's like, the next thing you would start to look toward would be like, okay, so what's my topography telling me, and where is the topography creating these pinch points or saddles to get into and stuff like that. So when I visually look, in my mind's eye, when I think of the South, I'm thinking of more flat terrain, right? Now I know there are areas of the South that, you do get into some mountain ranges and like that and stuff like that, but I think of it predominantly as being less hilly and less mountainous. Is that true, or is that just a figment of my imagination? How does that play into hunting, that type of setup?
Yeah, we've got a little bit of all of it. In South Georgia, where I'm from, it's definitely flat. That's the lower coastal plain. You're literally, standing where what used to be the sea floor a few million years ago. I mean, it is flat. And we literally call it the Flatwoods. And so, yeah, there's no topography. The elevation change is so subtle you barely can tell it most of the time. to where I am in North Georgia, which is called what the physiographic region is called the Piedmont, meaning foothills, because it is the foothills of the southern Appalachian Mountains. So in North Georgia, we've actually got, the Blue Ridge Mountains, which are Appalachian Mountains. And there you truly do get, the ridges and the valleys and the saddles and things like that can affect, as I understand it, from folks who hunt those types of areas, that definitely create travel patterns that you can take advantage of, like deer cutting through saddles to get from one valley to another, or running ridges and going off of points down into a valley, and bedding along the mid slopes of ridges, so that they can kind of look down and sort of see, have a good vantage point over danger. Those things do exist in northern Georgia, north Alabama, places like that. Tennessee, of course, is right. Got a lot of topography, and Kentucky, as well. North Carolina has mountains. North Carolina is like Georgia, so is South Carolina, in that there are mountains in the northern parts of the state, but flat coastal plains in the rest of it. So yeah, we've got a little bit of all of it.
Right. So,
but the kind of the connecting thing again is that through in all these states, mountainous or not, is the ubiquitous nature of the forest cover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be a tough hunt, man. I'm picturing it in my mind, and it reminds me of, going to almost like a northeast forest where you don't get that breakup. You enjoy the benefit of having, some elevation change, like when you get up into the New England states and stuff like that. But whenever you get up into those big woods, it's like it's kind of what you're talking about. Now, you're not talking about the significant understory that you're talking about in terms of how much growth they have, but just in terms of blocks of timber not being broken up, they've got, pretty good coverage. So what I kind of keep going to is how do you find bedding in that amount of understory? Because it sounds to me like almost everything and anywhere could be bedding.
You just said it. It's more like, how do you not find bedding?
Right.
It's everywhere. Because like I say, again, for example, we're greening up right now as I speak. There are blooms on the trees right now. There's a crabapple tree in my yard that's leafing out. So the growing season's beginning, and it doesn't end until, we get hard frost in November. Right. And so that really is, compared to up north where things are much slower, it's a clock that's always running on your habitat. Your habitat is always aging in the South quickly. And again, like I said, spaces that aren't maintained by someone and kept, the clock rewound on it, are aging and filling up with vegetation, and that's aging and shading out eventually and becoming a forest. And so it's just cover everywhere. A clear cut done by a timber company is wide open for about a year, and then it's going to be neck deep in briars and lots of other good things for deer. But, sit there and look at 100-acre square clear cut that's neck deep in briars and tell me where the bottleneck is. There ain't one.
Yeah.
You'll find deer trails coming in and out along every edge of the boundary of a cut like that. They go in and out of it. They bed all throughout it. And so, and even once that's replanted in pines and, it comes up to about waist high pines, and that's still great bedding cover, but it is a solid block of it.
Right.
So it makes it very difficult to predict, anything around bedding behavior or bedding areas. Deer have plenty of bedding areas in the South, and they don't have to be choosy in most cases. So, it's literally, like you said, a deer can bed almost anywhere it wants, and they do.
Right. So if I'm going with you and we're going to hang a stand, how are we picking? Like, how are we choosing where we should hang that stand? Because it's like, you've got just say it's that fresh timber cut scenario that's about a year old, that's just, nasty deep with briars, and there's no way you're going to hunt that. And they're getting in and out of it every which way you can possibly imagine. So there's no way to really say, I know that unless you're hanging a trail camera and you have something on a pattern that he or she is showing up like clockwork at a certain time every day or every 2 or 3 days or whatever the case might be. So that notwithstanding, if you were just going in and saying, I need to find a good location to hang a set, how are you making that decision?
Food. It's food. You got to, and it's not only food in the early season before the rut. The rut becomes, two things drive buck behaviors, their movements and their home range use throughout the year. And it is, the rut causes the biggest change in their movements and behaviors. but the rest of the time it's pretty much food and hiding. But so in the early season, in archery season, when it's coming in, I'm looking for food. I'm looking for crab apples that might be falling, or a persimmon tree that's dropping, or a food plot that I've planted that is, a late summer, early fall, cowpea, soybeans, or whatever that's still productive that they're coming to. Because late summer, early fall is a little bit of a stress period in the South nutritionally, because much of the stuff that they've been eating, the green forage and things like that, are kind of matured, kind of getting tougher. They're not as digestible. They're not as nutritious anymore. And so things like fruit, like crab apples, like food plots, can become particularly attractive that time of year. So you're keying on food like that in the early season. Where are the deer going to eat? And that, like I said, that comes back to the scouting. Turkey season is a great time for me to scout, because crab apples are in bloom. And you're out turkey hunting and you see blooms, boom, there's a crab apple tree, and you flag and mark that sucker so you can find it in bow season.
Right.
And so, because that's, out of all this surrounding cover, when those crab apples are dropping, that's a great place to be hanging a bow stand, because deer are going to be coming to it.
Right.
Same thing with a persimmon. Same thing with acorns that begin falling early, and when the white oaks, once they begin falling. But then once you get into the rut, it's rut movements. It's where the buck's going to be, and of course they're going to be where the does are. So again, you're still following food, food plots, acorns, or once rifle season comes in, getting somewhere where you have a good vantage point. An open, if you do have an open hardwood area, hunting that so that you can see deer when they're going to be moving. A lot of people set up, of course, shooting lanes, or will have, if they're not hunting over a food plot. For the rut, you might have a wheel and hub and spoke design type thing, where you have cleared strips emanating or out from a deer stand or a shooting tower, and you're up in that, and you're surrounded by thick cover, planted pines, cut over, whatever, clear cut, whatever it might be, but there are strips, long 100, 200 yard mowed strips out through there, maybe even planted in something like cereal grains, and you're monitoring those and watching for deer to step out in them. So it's about, with a rifle and gun season, getting somewhere where you have can see a long way.
Right. So it's interesting, because like as I'm listening to you, I'm just trying to think of, how I kind of hunt, right, and how I would maybe have to change. So it sounds to me like, so whenever you're hunting in early season, like you mentioned, you're definitely on food, and that's pretty similar up here. I think that's, whenever you're hunting early, you want to get on that bed to food pattern, catch them whenever they're coming to feed, whether it's they're leaving the food source, if you can get a nice cold front in October and catch them in the morning. If not, you're probably kind of I guess narrowed down to hunting evenings to get them coming to the food source. But where I think it's a little different is whenever you hit the rut. Whenever you hit the rut, it sounds like you're still traveling with food. Like you're still, what is the next best food source that they're going to start to rotate to? And I think some of that holds true for the Midwest and Northeast. But then, at least for me, it becomes more of where are the does bedding, and how can I get close to where the does are bedding, because the bucks are going to have to check those doe bedding areas, which is a challenge for the South, because as you had mentioned, bedding is kind of everywhere, and trying to pinpoint where they're bedding is like finding a needle in a haystack. And then I'm also then looking for what are the travel corridors they're going to run that topography has made for me that they're going to have to use to get from bedding area to bedding area to bedding area, because I can intercept them in those places as well. And so that sounds like that's one of the biggest differences, like strategically, is that in the South, you're really mapping out how the food is changing. And you do that in the North, but it's like there comes a point in a time, I think, in the North and in the Midwest, where it's like you're still paying attention to that, but you're also shifting, and now you're focusing on where those does are going to be bedding. Do you think it's a fair assessment?
Yeah, except that you're right. I mean, well, not except that. I mean, I think you just said that or laid it out, that here we don't have that component of looking at the patterns of bed to feed and, these corridors that they're using to travel along between point A to point B. Mm-hmm. You know where they're eating, so you got to try to be there in a way that your wind isn't blowing into the food source. But yes, it's still difficult to determine which direction. We know where point A is, the food source, but point B is the bedding area is the part that's unclear, because there are options in every direction. Right. It's difficult to predict where the deer are going to be coming from a bedding area in most cases. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't exist. There certainly are properties where it just happens to set up from the way the ag fields are, or barriers like roadways or rivers or things like that can certainly create movement patterns that you can exploit. But in terms of where a deer can bed, it's often plenty of options in multiple directions, and it's a lot more cloudy in most cases to make that prediction about how they will approach along what route and how to position yourself between A and B.
Right. And I think the other thing you had mentioned just made me think of, if you don't know where they're coming from, it's like, I guess, talk to me a little bit about how important scent control is in the South, because not just the heat, so you're probably sweating more than you would sweat whenever you're in the North or the Midwest, but also if you don't know where they're coming from, it's like you have to have your scent, regimen or whatever. It sounds like probably under pretty good control, considering that you think you may be playing the wind correctly, but the deer you're hunting could very well show up downwind from you just because of where he or she happened to be bedding that day.
That's right. Yeah. And there certainly are cases in some stands you can set up, and I can think of some on our farm where generally you can eliminate some directions, and you feel pretty sure at a certain, either morning or evening that deer are not going to be coming from a certain direction. You do have those instances, but it's tougher to eliminate, a whole bunch of different directions and know confidently that they're going to be coming from a certain bedding area. Right. So yeah, it's scent control. It's key for any hunter, that. Yeah. But certainly, yeah, many, many times I have, and I'm pretty religious about my scent control. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of people, down to the point of, cleaning my boots with scent-free soap and keeping those separate, not wearing those in the vehicle, not wearing those around camp. Yep. And yet, still, I mean, you know how it works. Mm-hmm. We can all try our best to be scent-free, but you're not 100% scent-free. That's right. And a deer can still smell you, if they're in a close enough proximity. Many, many times I've been in a stand and looked over my shoulder and seen a deer cross the path I walked coming in, stop, sniff the path, turn around and go the other way. Yeah. So, it's tough to eliminate directions from which deer can come. In many cases, they can come from almost any direction.
Right. So when we're talking about food plots, because you had mentioned, of course, fruit trees are dynamite. I've experienced that. I had never experienced that until this year, where my dad bought a new property this year that I hung cameras on and watched it through cameras this year and didn't hunt it at all. And I didn't spend one day hunting it this year just because I wanted the cameras to do the work and try to figure out what was on the property. And there's some nice deer there, and I wanted to get a sense of how they're going to move if you just leave them alone. Which was great. I learned a lot. Then also through scouting and stuff, I learned that there are a handful of apple trees and pear trees and stuff like that on the property. And man, you are right. Those things are just like a deer magnet. Like I'd never seen it like that before, and I hung a camera near it, and it was just every day like clockwork in basically the entire early portion of October and September. It was they were just hammering that area. So this year you can bet your bottom dollar there'll be a stand there for the early part of October. But in terms of food plots, what seems to work well, in South or maybe just specifically Georgia? Because I know you'd mentioned some type of cereal grain you might want to use, and some of those strips that you cut out for your tower or what have you. Is there anything that you've found or that you've experienced that has worked better than other things?
Yeah, it all depends on what your goal there is. Mm-hmm. It's like I said earlier, in the South, late summer, early fall can be a natural nutrition depression for deer because forbs and vines and things that they normally browse that are nice and juicy and young in the spring are now old and tougher and not as good. They've matured and gone to seed and that kind of thing. So a cowpea, soybean type mix is very good in late summer. But then if your goal is, and that can set you up on some great early season archery opportunities. If your goal is more gun season, October, November attraction, it's the cool season annuals like your cereal grains, mm-hmm. rye, wheat, and oats, and maybe Austrian winter peas. Things like that, which are, because they're annuals, you can plant them, they come up quick, they're going to give you attraction this season, unlike, say, a perennial clover that you've got to, establish in the fall, but that really won't be producing much attraction until spring and then again the following fall. Right. And then I like brassicas, rape, kale, turnips, which we plant and we often mix with cereal grains like oats, wheat, so that they'll be attracted to the oats and wheat during fall and hunting season. But then, just like brassicas everywhere in the Deep South, just like a lot of places, they tend to become more attracted to deer after they've been hit with a really good hard frost or freeze. And so, into December and January and February, the brassicas can fill that winter gap in nutrition. The big picture here is, and there's an article in the next issue of Quality Whitetails by Dr. Craig Harper about this and talking about some of the food plot basics. And one of the things he really drives home is you have to remember this. You carry a deer's nutrition on natural forages and plants. If you cannot carry a deer on food plots. Food plots are the icing on the cake or the gap filler for native vegetation. And so in the South, like I say, those gaps are late summer and winter. And that's so. And then, during hunting season, you're talking about attracting them for hunting. So which goal is it? That really kind of determines which crop you plant. And like I just mentioned, there's a lot of good options for those.
Right. Yeah, I think you mentioned something that was important. I think it's important no matter if you're setting up food plots or setting up to put on a hunt, is determining what your goal is, right? Because without that, you're just kind of wandering aimlessly. You have the wrong crop in at the wrong time, or you're targeting the wrong type of deer that don't exist in the area that you hunt. So I think a lot of it's just making sure that your goals are aligned with your with your opportunities, realistically. I think that we oftentimes maybe get a little wide-eyed with what we're going to accomplish, because I always kind of use this rule of thumb. It's like, I don't know that I have enough money to feed deer. You know what I mean? So as far as like to create food plots and stuff like that are going to really to do that, I don't have the kind of pocketbook that you need to do that. So I definitely have to rely on, Mother Nature to help with that. And to your point, just look to see what are some areas in times that I can supplement to make sure that they remain healthy and have the things they need during the course of the year, because I can help float them for a month or two, but I can't feed them for 12 months.
And the good thing about that is the nice thing about the fact that deer really need that native forage year round for their basic needs is there are a lot of really easy ways to provide it. As a hunter, you don't have to own the land even to do some things that will really make a difference there. Right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's some simple things as far as like, whether it's, you have to own the land to do this, but, hinge cutting and stuff like that, getting more food down at deer level and things like that. The other thing that I think that we forget about is that these are foraging animals. So it's like, even when you create a food plot, they're really only hitting that destination spot one time a day, and they feed, I think, 5 times a day, right? So they're really hitting it if it's a destination spot at night, and then they're leaving. So they're really only hitting the buffet one time, and the rest of their food they're getting throughout the course of the day by browsing on whatever is available to them. So I think that I sometimes think we give food plots more credit than they deserve in terms of how much they impact the overall health and sustainability of a herd on a property. Just by the nature that they aren't like us. They don't sit down with a fork and a plate and sit down and say, I'm going to eat, and this is what I'm going to eat. It's just kind of like, This is where I'm at, and this is what there is to eat while I'm here.
The thing to remember about that is a deer's digestive system is a lot like ours, but it works best with a diversity of different foods. And the deer, I'm not going to say they know that, but their behavior guides them in a way to satisfy that digestive need. And so they might be walking into the most beautiful clover, high protein, digestible clover plot you've ever seen, and on the way in, they're going to stop and bite some twig that's that's terrible in comparison, but their stomach needs a range of different foods in it all year long. And so they know that they're going to eat I've sat on many a food plot and watched a deer, eating briars or even dry leaves on the edge of the food plot before they walked into it to feed in the food plot. They're not ever going to, I like grits, but I'm not going to eat grits all day long every day. I would die. I would have malnutrition.
Right.
So, you've got to have some diversity, and deer do too.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I like the grits. I think, I don't know if there's anything that I could eat every day, all day. I do like some grits, though. I will say that I could eat some grits. So the one thing I wanted to touch on, man, is, I know the one thing that comes to my mind when I think of the South more so than anything, right? We covered a lot of, interesting things that kind of make the South unique. But to me, it's the heat, right? It's just like is the climate. And so, I'm just curious what that does to your hunting. Like early season, like it's got to be hot, right? But more specifically, how does that weather or the heat, impact the rut activity? So, what does the warm weather do to that? Is it like, what's the timing of the rut in the south? And then do the deer act the same way that they would in the north or in the Midwest? Or does it happen more under the cover at night because the temps are cooler? So how does the rut kind of play out in that geographic area?
Yeah, it's the rut happens no matter what the weather is.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens the same year about the same time. Now, different areas of the South, as I'm sure you probably know, some of them are famous for this, have some late and some early rut peaks. And that's, some of that is natural. Some of it appears to be a result of moving some genetics around during restoration.
Yep.
And so, like here in Georgia, historically, we have an earlier rut as you get the further south you go. Down into Florida, it's very early. In coastal Georgia, it's in October. So my family's land in southeast Georgia is like a late October rut. And as you get up into middle Georgia, it's more mid-November. And then over into Alabama and Mississippi, they've got a January, even into February late rut.
Yeah.
So it's all over the calendar, but it's pretty much the same time each year for each population. And yeah, the weather is not going to change that. Sometimes we feel like, as hunters, maybe it's a warm spell and we don't feel like the deer are moving and we didn't see them. And, hunters will often say, boy, I just don't think the rut happened this year. Well, guess what? All the does got bred.
Right.
You're going to have fawns next year.
Right.
Don't worry. The rut happened. Maybe you didn't see them and didn't get to see the activity you thought you would see, and it didn't feel like the deer were moving, but don't worry. They were taking care of business. It still happened.
Yeah.
Deer are... that it's hot down here because you're a human and you can look at the forecast and you can travel around and go, boy, it's hot down here compared to where I'm from. And I can go to other places and go, wow, it's cold.
Right.
Deer aren't like that. Deer don't know. They live where they live and they are adapted to live where they live. And a deer in South Florida, is got certain adaptations physically to be fine in that temperature and would not do well if you dropped it in southern Ontario.
Right.
Just like if you brought up a big borealis whitetail from up there and dropped it in the Everglades, it's not going to do too well.
Right.
So, they are adapted to the temperature. They don't know it's hot. And they still have to go about business, and they have to eat, and they have to survive, and they have to breed and raise their fawns, and just like everywhere else. So, yeah, it's hot, and some seasons I run my thermocell all season long to keep the mosquitoes off. But I still see deer, I still hunt deer, I still kill deer, and they still breed, and we still have a rut. But to your question about how does the temperature affect the rut itself and affect rut behavior, that's a question that is an interesting one to me, because I'll be honest with you, the science, all the good science that's out there on this question, looking at studies of deer wearing GPS collars, the science says temperature really does not affect deer movement.
Right.
And yet, as hunters, we all kind of go, but we've all got a story of hunting a cold front and feeling like, man, the deer started moving. And before this, when it was hot, they weren't moving. And, I'm the same way. I'm a hunter too, and I feel the same way. In fact, I was at the Deer Study Group meeting, as I mentioned, in Nashville, Tennessee this week. That is a meeting held annually that's a gathering of deer researchers and biologists from all over the country who come together to share their research. And I'm there to just, as a journalist, to listen in and pick up new information and learn and talk to these folks. And I even, I asked several of them just casually, what do you think about that? And a lot of them said the same thing. And that was, the data says temperature and weather doesn't affect the movement. Right. But as a hunter, I'm going to cover my ass and I'm going to hunt a cold front. Right. Because they're probably, it feels like it makes them move. So, we, as hunters, we go hunt the cold front. So,
exactly.
Anyway, but it works the same way in the South, just like hunters in the North feel it does, in that when, the cold front, or when the temperature changes, even though the temperature itself might be different here in the South and on a warmer scale, we like to be in the woods when it's cooler, just like you guys do. Right.
Yeah. No, I lived in Florida for a little while, man. I was willing to do anything in the cooler weather before I was willing to do it in the hot weather, man. It's so that's for sure. So I appreciate my my cool weather, and I'll continue to hunt my cold fronts. And I totally get you. It's like I've read some of those studies and stuff, and I've sat in on a couple seminars and stuff like that. And it's like, and I know what the data says, and I'm a data guy. It's like, that's kind of one of the things I like. I like chunks of data. It's part of what I do for a living and stuff like that. I was looking at some analytics and studies and reports and stuff like that. And so it's like, I appreciate good data. But there's just something that I'm just like, I know what it says, but I just can't, I won't go out and hunt a warm day. You know what I mean? It's like some days I'll skip it and it might be the best day to hunt, but.
Well, and see that right there to me explains what I think a lot of these beliefs come from. And that is, I think we are just kind of raised as hunters, buying or being, sold the idea that you go when it's cold because that's when the deer's moving. Mm-hmm. So that's when you go. And if you don't go when it's hot, how do you know?
How do you know if they moved? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. How do you compare? Exactly. So, I think people really have to stop and ask themselves, are you being completely objective about what you see and your how much you're going when you say deer don't move when it's hot? Are you really out there as much when it's hot as you are when it's cold? Because the data shows they're moving. Now, there really hasn't been a study that really has dug into this, and there might be subtle differences about maybe where they move.
Right.
Maybe they hold tighter to cover when it's warmer, but they're still moving and feeding and breeding.
Right.
And when it's colder, they get out in the open more. Nobody has really addressed that question. That could explain why GPS collars are still moving around when we think they're not.
Right.
So yeah, I think more has got to be done on this question.
Right. I think for us to look at it objectively, though, it's like us hunters, we would have to be logical and rational creatures and not superstitious, which those three things combined are challenging for any of us to do at the same time. So
that's right.
Oh man. But hey, I have two more questions for you, man, because I don't want to eat up all your time here, man. We've been talking for a little more than an hour, and I want to be sensitive to what you have going on this evening. So one, I'm just curious, what is the difference in terms of body size and antler size for a buck, like in the South versus like the Northeast or the Midwest? Do you see there's a disparity? Is there not really so much of a disparity? I don't have any knowledge on this particular topic, so I'm just kind of looking to get educated here on this. So what's the difference?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and yeah, it is true that certain regions can support deer of a certain size that others can't. And we have that range here in the South, in Southeast Georgia, where my family's land is like I said, it's former ocean floor, it's sandy soils, and it's beautiful and I love it. It's where I'm from, but it just doesn't grow. The soil fertility doesn't grow the volume of forage that can be grown in other countries or other parts of the country. And so, yeah, average deer body size is smaller, and it goes, our barrier islands on the coast are where some of our smallest deer are. And then the lower coastal plain where my family's land is they're a little bit bigger, and they get bigger as you go up into middle Georgia and into over in southwest Georgia where there's a lot more ag. So, we're down in southeast Georgia where, a 160-pound buck on the hoof is a fully mature, really good buck. Mm-hmm. And other parts of the state are growing, 200 and 220-pound bucks and bigger at maturity.
Right.
Antler size follows the same pattern. And this is where it's something I have over the years spent a lot of time trying to remind folks about practicing QDM, is to tune your expectations to where you stand and learn to celebrate achieving the best you can achieve where you are. If you, go into South Georgia where I grew up, expecting to grow 160s and 70s like they've got in other parts of the state or in Iowa or, anywhere else where those deer are more common, you're going to be disappointed. Mm-hmm. But if you go into that determining, okay, what's a good deer for where we are, and let's produce the best deer we can in this area, this county, you'll be successful at it, and you can do that, and you can achieve that and feel good about it. So, but yeah, like for example, where I'm from, Wayne County, Georgia, where my farm is, the number one deer in the county, and we've got the Georgia Outdoor News Magazine keeps these records of deer that have been officially scored by county, and the number one deer in our county nets 152. Mm-hmm. And by the time you get down into number 10 or so, you're down into the teens, the 110s to low 120s.
Right.
Now, some other counties in the state, 150 would be the 10th ranked buck, right, or maybe 150 might not even break into the top 10 in the county. So that's where, you have to look at that, and you have to say, look, I'm in a county where if we kill a 120 class mature buck, that is a great deer.
Yeah.
And, you need to celebrate that. Whereas in another part of the county, a 120 might be a really good 2.5-year-old or an average 3 or whatever. Mm-hmm. So in another part of the state. So yeah, it definitely, there's a range there. It not only within Georgia, but throughout the Southeast. Florida has, a fairly small deer, particularly as you get down, to the Everglades. And then of course you got the key deer, which is the smallest smallest subspecies of whitetail there is. And it just changes throughout the South with soil types. You got the Black Belt in Alabama that's very productive. You got the Mississippi Delta area that is in that soil type that is extremely productive, and you got other areas even with those states that are not as productive. Mississippi and Alabama and also have a lower coastal plain like Georgia does, sandy soils that just like Georgia have. You have to have more realistic expectations about body size and antler size.
Yeah, I think I know we mentioned goal setting earlier, and I think it's just important that you brought it up again, is that you have to understand what the possibilities are for where you live. I think that's key. The other thing that you'd mentioned, which I thought was really interesting, and I just wanted to kind of bring up again, was that you mentioned volume of forage based on the soil type that you have, and I think that's important to kind of think about and take away, because I think there's I sat in on a QDMA seminar with Craig Daughtry. I believe it's Neil Daughtry. Actually, Craig's his father, so Neil.
Yeah.
And we were and he did a seminar on habitat from like soup to nuts, pretty much. And like one of the coolest things that I learned during that seminar was exactly what you just said, was that the volume of forage is the biggest difference between growing big deer and not growing big deer. It's essentially how he put it. They did a study. He's like by normal thinking, if you will, the way people typically think about it. If people say in the Midwest they grow better quality forage, right? And people for the longest time thought it was actually the transfer of nutrients from the soil to the plant. The deer ate the plant and was getting more nutrients because that plant had more nutrients, was why they were growing better deer. So by that logic, you should be able to take a deer from the Midwest and take him to, Pennsylvania or Northeast or the South or wherever, and vice versa. And the deer that moved south would get smaller. The deer that moved north would get bigger, and that just didn't hold true. And so they did some further studies, and then they also studied the plants themselves, and they found out that plants in both areas had the same exact nutritional value. What they had determined was that the soils in the Midwest, in some of these places that are known for having great capabilities of growing crops, were actually able to put out more tonnage per acre than their counterparts in another state. And so the deer had more access to food just by its ability to produce volume per acre versus another state. So it's like telling somebody that, we're going to give you nothing but a 1,200 calorie diet, and then we're going to give this person over here a 2,500 calorie diet. That's the difference between why one person is larger and the other person is not. You know what I mean?
And that's coming from some research by Dr. Craig Harper out of the University of Tennessee that really has looked at that. And then the bottom line is, think about ragweed or any other forb that deer really love to browse. You take a stem of ragweed from South Georgia and compare it to a stem of ragweed from some area with much richer soils. It's the same amount of nutrition. Mm-hmm. It's just that area with richer soils can grow a bigger ragweed plant and more ragweed than we can in sandier soils. So it's and that should drive your expectations for what you can produce. But also, again, comes back to the importance of improving that habitat. I don't care what soils you're on. If you've got shade on the ground everywhere and you're not growing any understory plants, you can't hardly go anywhere anyhow.
Yeah.
So you need to be, doing some of those practices that put sun on the ground and start producing that understory of diverse plants that deer will use all year long.
Yeah. And it was a cool, and he did cite Dr. Harper, now that I'm thinking about, because that was almost 3 years ago that I sat in on that. But I just thought it was super, it finally made it really, really clear for me. Like I understood now, like what the challenges were, geographically speaking. So with that, man, I will ask you one last question. And this one it's an easy one, softball. You ready? I'm going to knock this one out of the park.
I'm ready, man.
So just give us a personal hunting story, if you wouldn't mind, something that's meaningful to you. Could be a success, could be a failure, a near miss, whatever the case might be. But give us every detail from, what state you were hunting, time of year, and everything from the time you stepped foot out of the truck and when you got back to the tailgate.
Okay. Well, let me, going back to something John said about about hunters sort of treating each other roughly when it comes to looking on what other people harvest and looking down on them or making them feel bad about that. And it kind of brings to mind a story that happened to me, and I actually did write about it. It's been a few years back, but it was at our property, our farm in Southeast Georgia. And one of the things we found as we practiced QDM there over time, and anybody will find this if they will, if they do QDM and they begin to build numbers of older bucks, if they protect yearlings and just get some more bucks into that 2 and 3 and up age class, and they are taking the right number of does, so you're kind of bringing the sex ratio roughly into balance, what you will find is rattling and grunting works a lot better. And it used to be on our farm that, you could grunt till you were blue in the face and rattle till your hands were bloody, and nothing was going to respond. Mm-hmm. There were bucks there, but they're really the ratio and the density of adult bucks was such that there really wasn't much rut competition going on. They didn't have any interest in responding to a fight like that. Mm-hmm. But that changed totally through QDM. So, rattling and grunting is now a successful technique on the farm, and we do it each year and rattle bucks in. And this, it's been about 5 or 6 years ago, I guess I would say. And I was down in the swamp. About half of our farm is a floodplain or swamp, as we call it, along Little Satilla Creek. And I was down in the swamp and did some rattling and heard, what you want to hear is a deer trotting through the brush right after you rattle, and you get excited. You put the rattling antlers down and got my binoculars up, getting ready to kind of see what was going on and hand on my rifle. And out steps this buck, and immediately I could see that he was probably not one that I was going to shoot. And he came on in. He was a nice 8-pointer, but I got the binoculars on him, studied his body, and realized that this was probably a 2.5-year-old buck. Mm-hmm. Decent 8-point rack, legal buck, but kind of had the slim body and young musculature of a 2.5-year-old. I knew he wasn't a yearling. He was a little too good for a yearling in the lower coastal plain, mm-hmm. but and I put studied in binoculars, didn't never picked up the gun, enjoyed. Actually, I'll be honest, that was bow hunting at that point. It was during gun season, but I was bow hunting, so I had my bow. And I had taken it off the hook and had it in my hand, was holding my binoculars up with my right hand studying him. So I put my bow back on the hook and just enjoyed watching him. And he came in and, like they'll do once they think they've heard something like that, come in, look around, wander around a little bit. And if you don't rattle again and they don't spot you, he's going to drift on off. And that's what he did. He drifted on off back into the swamp. And the next day we have some neighbors of ours there in town. We live right near the town of Scriven, Georgia, and some neighbors of ours that we hunt with, and they also practice QDM. They have a deer cooler, walk-in cooler, that they kind of let the community use, and it's got a nice skinning area that we've set up years ago with a sink and a gambrel and a winch, boat winch, so you can winch your deer up, and a hose so you can clean, and jawbone pullers and stuff like that, and then a walk-in cooler to hang your deer if you need to. So the next day I happened to be up there after hunting that morning, and this was early gun season. It was late October, and so the rut was on, and went up to, I had not done any good that morning, went up to the skinning pole to see what was going on, because a lot of people gather up around there with their deer, mm-hmm. and drove up, and there was that 2.5-year-old 8-pointer hanging on the gambrel. And the guy that had shot him was a young guy. I'd say he's probably in his 20s. And a couple of his buddies were there with him. I kind of knew who they were, but I had not met them before. They hunted a property that backs up to our farm, so I didn't really know these guys, and got out. And I kind of had the feeling that I think a lot of people would have in that situation was, here's a buck I had passed. Mm-hmm. He didn't meet my particular age criteria, which generally on the farm we're going for 3+. And I knew he wasn't a buck I wanted to shoot, so I had to let him go. And yet, here he was dead, killed by a neighbor, hanging on the skinning pole. And, what do you do in that situation?
Right.
Do you get angry? Do you, berate the guy for shooting a buck you passed? Do you tell him you passed him? do you say something smart and snarky like, boy, you'd have been a good one next year? Or do you do something a little different? And what I ended up doing was, I went up and said, "Did you get this deer?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Congratulations." And we talked a little bit about it. He told me, where he got him. And I said, "Are you going to pull a jawbone?" And he said, "No, I don't." It turned out he didn't even know how to pull one. Mm-hmm. And I said, "Would you mind if I pull a jawbone to see how old he is?" And he said, "No, go ahead." So I got out the jawbone shears and the jawbone puller and pulled the jawbone out. And of course, exactly what I expected. This deer was 2.5 years old. Mm-hmm. And I looked at it and the guy asked me, "What do you think?" And I said, "I think he's 2.5. And then I started showing him on the jawbone how I knew that, looking at the tooth replacement patterns. And then, it clearly was at least a 2.5-year-old because it had replaced its temporary third molar. And then the wear on the rear molars was not near enough to put him beyond 2.5. So I explained all that to him, and these other two guys stepped in, and they got real curious, and they're, looking and asked me questions about how you age this jawbone. And, it was a good moment. I showed them a little bit about jawbone aging. They thanked me. I did tell the guy that I had seen him the day before, and where I'd seen him. I told him, I said, I rattled him in. I didn't tell him I passed him. Right. I didn't tell him that this was a deer I wouldn't have shot. But what I felt like I did was introduce the concept of age to a hunter who'd never really thought about it. Right. It was clear that these guys had never really thought about how old is a deer. They'd never pulled a jawbone, didn't know how to use that technique because it just hadn't occurred to them. This was a legal buck. That was what they were after, and they took it. Right. And my hat's off to anyone who does that. If you're a legal, ethical hunter and you're following the rules and the deer is legal and he makes you happy, you should take him. Mm-hmm. And that decision should be yours and yours alone, and it shouldn't be made based on what is someone else going to say when they see me with this deer later. Right. It should be about your goals and what makes you happy as a hunter and where you are in your stage as a hunter and your experience and your path that you're walking as a deer hunter. Yeah. And that guy did what was right for him. He took the deer that he wanted. It was legal, and he enjoyed that deer. And so far be it from me to tell him he'd done the wrong thing, because he had not. Right. For me to have berated him would have been the wrong thing. Right. But instead of that, I used it as a teaching opportunity, simply by asking about age, by showing them about the jawbone and how they could age that themselves, how they could pull it. They were fascinated watching me take it out. And though I haven't seen those guys again, I don't think they hunt there anymore. I don't know whether that had any kind of a long-term impact on them. What I can tell you is this, is that when we first started quality deer management there on the farm, we were the only ones in the area doing it. And the other thing, one of the interesting things about this area is there's still some dog hunting legal in parts of that county. And this is where you chase deer with dogs and try to get out in front of the race and shoot the deer as it comes by. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. Yeah. But that is a tradition that's still here in some parts of the South. And part of our county is a dog hunting county. And of course, when you're dog hunting and running deer with dogs, you don't age a deer or even look for count antler points or anything else when a buck's running by. If you see antlers, he's legal, you're going to be shooting. So, it's tough to do QDM with dog hunting. So anyway, this is an area where QDM was a new thing. And when we first started doing it, we were the only ones doing it. And today, when you look at the top 10 list of bucks in the county, the top 5 or 6 have all been taken either on our farm or on properties around our farm by people who practice QDM with us. And so my point is, it's infectious. Mm-hmm. If you will simply take opportunities like that, small opportunities like that, to show people what you do, or to teach them something like jawbone aging, without pressuring, without getting angry, or trying to coerce someone or pushing someone to protect an age class of deer that they're not ready to protect. That's not the way this works. All of us take this thing in a stair-step approach and work our way up to stages that we're ready for. My first deer was a yearling buck, like a lot of us. Yep. And I would give you that deer back for nothing in the world. I'd shoot him again over and over and over again. Exactly. So all of us should have the opportunity to work our way up. And if your neighbor has never taken a buck or has never taken a 2.5-year-old buck, give them that chance. You don't go to them and say, hey, I want you to stop shooting everything but 5.5-year-olds. Just because you're at that level doesn't mean they need to be. And that's something I think people have got to understand about QDM is be patient with it. You don't force it on people. but you lead by example. And I feel like that's what we have done. That's what I was trying to do when I showed that guy how to age his buck. There was no pressure. There was no ill will. I didn't tell him he'd done anything wrong because he hadn't. And that's what we've done. Now, whether in that case, like I said, it worked with that person, I don't know. But I can tell you that in the neighborhood, leading by example has worked. Right. And folks in that area now protect yearling bucks. And again, that's one of the other misunderstanding is if you can just get folks to protect most of the yearling bucks out there, even if, their kid takes one or a few kids take one or a few adults take one every now and then, if most of the yearling bucks are making it to 2, that's really all you have to do to start building numbers of of older bucks. Yeah. It's not about letting them all go until they're 5.5.
Right.
That really is pretty difficult in a rare situation for most people because 5.5-year-old bucks are not numerous, in anywhere. Right. So that's the story I think about a lot and try to share with people as an example of, not because I'm not holding myself up here for praise, because I'll be honest with you, when I first stepped out of the truck and saw that buck swinging there, my first reaction was to be upset, to be a little frustrated, to be angry. Here's a deer I'd let go and now he's dead. Yep. And I think anyone's reaction to that situation initially might be to be a little hot under the collar. Mm-hmm. But I think if you just stop, keep that to yourself and think about ways you can turn those situations into a positive connection with a neighbor or a hunting friend or whatever that might be. After all, y'all, this is hunting. Yeah. It's supposed to be fun. Yep. We're all supposed to be having fun, and if we all have fun together and lead by example, this stuff works a lot better.
Yeah, no, that's a great story, man. I think it's one of those things, if somebody doesn't know, how are they supposed to know unless they're educated? It takes someone just taking the time to explain things to them. You know what I mean? Because most people are open to, if you ask hunters, right, do you want to shoot? Do you want to hunt big deer? I don't think you would get an argument from any one of them. You know what I mean? And so then the next step is, do you understand how to get to that, right? If they're interested, right? And then explaining to them, just as you did, what are some things you can look for to help you understand, like, what type of deer you are looking at, whether you're aging on the hoof or whether you're pulling the jawbone later or whatever the case might be. But it just takes having that conversation to just drop a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of education, and let them kind of then take it, you know what I mean, and do what they're going to do with it. I know on our family farm, we had something that was similar. We don't have quite the cooperative, the co-op around us, like you're talking about, but it's roughly 240 acres, and the one farm is, and over the course of time, I've kind of done some habitat management on it and stuff like that with my father-in-law's blessing and help. We've slowly but surely, through me passing deer and him learning to start to pass deer, all the other guys that hunt the property started passing some deer that they typically would have shot in years past, And this was the first year since we've really started doing our management stuff that the bucks that we were seeing, or the deer, I shouldn't say the bucks because a lot of times you have displacement, of course, but this was the year where the deer who had grown up on the property would have had the habitat improvements that we've made since the time they were fawns, or since the times they were born and were weaned and grew up on the farm. They've had these habitat improvements, and I don't think it's any mystery why this year was the year that we finally saw probably some of the best bucks that we had seen, because we've spent the past several years passing deer. We've spent a lot more time watching what we have on the property so we can identify and understand who is there. And we spent the past couple of years making some, albeit small, but I think meaningful habitat updates that have helped us. And so it wasn't, I didn't go in with fire and brimstone. I went in with, if we can all agree these are some things we would like to achieve or do or have the opportunity to do, there are some ways to get us there, and let me share with you how to do that. And so then, I had a little resistance from my father-in-law. So what I ended up doing was, one year for Christmas, was I got him a QDMA membership, so he could start getting the magazine, because he wasn't he's an old, love him to death, but he's an old Pennsylvania farmer type, you know what I mean? And there's a certain type of approach, he's just an older generation. And so he wouldn't necessarily take what I was saying at face value, like I didn't know what I was talking about, or I was making it up, or whatever the case was. For whatever reason, he wasn't buying everything that I was selling. Until I started getting him I got him that membership, and he started getting that magazine. And it was just like probably a year and a half ago, he came up to me the one day and said, "You know what I read in that magazine? I read this, this, and this." He's like, "You were right." And I was like, I just said to him, I was like, could you repeat that again? You know what I mean? So it took a little longer than maybe I would have hoped, but he came around, and I did nothing but just get him a membership and said, if you're not going to, if I can't convince you, or if you don't want to, take in the information that I'm willing to share with you, then here, let me give you a resource, because he loves to read, and he loves to read about hunting. So it was the perfect thing to get him.
That's great.
And now he reads the magazine cover to cover, and he thinks it's like one of the coolest things, and I'm going to have an article in it. And so then the same thing when my dad bought this property. The first thing I did as soon as he bought the property was like he bought it, and then his birthday came up, and then I bought him a membership for his birthday too. I was like, here are a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's my end, man. You guys have been helping me in more ways than you know. But hey, man, I want to be sensitive to your time. Thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate the conversation. I feel like I'm a little bit more in tune with the South. I got my southern juices flowing a little bit.
I think your accent even changed a little bit.
It might have. I get accused of having a southern accent in Pennsylvania. I definitely do. It's kind of funny. But let
me hear you say y'all.
Y'all.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah. So
I got to work on it. Doing good.
I grew up in South Central Pennsylvania, which is, it probably has a lot more in common with the South than it does the rest of the state of Pennsylvania, or the North for that matter. So it's very much close to the Mason-Dixon line. So there's definitely some Southern influence where I grew up. But hey, man, thanks for coming on. Always look forward to talking to you, and can't wait to get in touch with you again soon.
Yeah, Clint, it's been a blast. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. We'd just like to thank Lindsay for joining us, and be sure to check out QualityDeerManagementAssociation.com. A really great resource for any deer hunter. Doesn't matter if you're looking for habitat information, if you're looking for info related to what's going on with deer across the country in terms of deer herd and deer herd management and so forth, or any type of policy changes that might be upcoming or important things that you need to know as a hunter. You will find all that information there. Also, if you're not a member of QDMA yet, I highly recommend that you go ahead and pick yourself up a membership. It's not all that expensive. It's like $35, I think, is the lowest tier to get in. You get some cool products along with it, and not least of all, you get a subscription to the Quality Whitetails magazine, which is absolutely my favorite whitetail magazine. I read. It's probably the only magazine that I read cover to cover whenever it lands in my mailbox. Also, want to be sure to give a big thanks to all you that continue to listen to the podcast. Want to make sure that I pass along John and I's gratitude. Of course, without you guys, we wouldn't have a show. So we're very appreciative that you choose to spend an hour plus, every week with John and I, and usually a guest talking deer hunting. So very much appreciative of that. And if you could head over to iTunes and leave us. Man, words are hard today. Leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes, and then subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already done so, to make sure it shows up on whatever mobile device you choose to use to listen to your podcasts. And before we shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners that continue to help us make this podcast possible. Wicked Tree Gear, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Tecumani Seed, Glacier Coolers, Ramcat Broadheads, and Trophy Taker Rests. And until next time, we'll see y'all.